Es regnet, it rains. So let's considering these expanding ripples coming from the enlightened executive policy, whatever it may be. So let's try to discern what it may be. Actually, Trump, um, and also I'm going to refer to a couple of podcasts I looked at just now as a sort of like micro curation, I guess. Um, but let's try to develop the theory based on the idea of the tariffs. Why is Trump so keen on tariffs? According to himself, it's due to trade imbalance policy. Um, but we could notice that the tariffs played this funny role that they basically, according to the left, like I would say it is sort of a leftist analysis. I'm not sure it's a thoroughgoing analysis. Um, but I mean, putting the same way if we had somebody from like the guy on this von Mises Institute, which was, so one of the things I was going to sort of promote was the Auron MacIntyre's discussion with the von Mises Institute, which I was attracted to for the double reasons that they just had the um, um, very, how should I say, paramount discussion between Dugin and the representative of the sort of the Netanyahu global order, Nick Land. So he had on this von Mises Institute guy who does the von Mises Institute really sort of is it totally the support of the current order? Now let's try to question that in connection with what is their view on tariffs? So that's an empirical question. I don't know the answer to it. It seems like driving it on the basis of principle von Mises should be against tariffs and in favor of some kind of old style free laissez-faire free market, on the theory that when you allow in steel from everywhere else, then the cost of making cans for your beer is cheaper for all Americans, and everything else you want to do with steel, including constructing new automotive plants, because the other tariffs are messing up the fact that there have been some offshoring to Mexico, for instance, to some car plants. But what does Trump himself say? Trump doesn't really say that he's doing the tariffs in order to resuscitate American businesses, but he more acts like he's doing it in order to the so-called trade imbalance stuff, which is very dubitative when you start to look at the way these statistics are, the way the sausage is made with regard to these statistics. So the von Mises Institute guy on the Auron MacIntyre thing, would he be for free market, old style, laissez-faire free market, question mark. But other than that, what's the situation with modern economics? So let's look at it sort of Heideggerian style. So it rains. It indicates that it's not just there's for the scientists studying rain, it rains, but that like we're right here in the situation where it rains, and then it's as though somebody shouted out in Wittgenstein's example, slab, meaning that some workmen are standing around, and whenever somebody says slab, it means you're supposed to go hand him a slab to do whatever he's doing. It rains, so somehow it means something for us, rather than only, I guess it relativizes science in that way. If we say it rains and then we want to say this is the object for strict scientific study, and most of all for physics as the basic study of motion, then it rains means what would the result be for physical science understood in that post-Galilean, Newtonian, post-Newtonian style. to an extent in this Roger Baconian and Enlightened style. So how does that affect daily life? And then I think the economic mode here shows sort of why. One thing, overall, this von Mises guy, the way he struck me is like we could best understand him by what Leo Strauss says. When Leo Strauss says 95% theoretical understanding is worse than just a simple cafe version. Something you could say in a cafe, but without being totally wrong. Whereas the guy that has he's studied up, he knows all the ordinary gossip about Leo Strauss, like in this case, like everything he said was just like he rehearsed the ordinary gossip everybody says, and then plus he had a couple individual relationships with some of the so quote unquote Straussians who aren't Strauss himself and who don't who, as it were, don't necessarily even represent themselves as being Strauss scholars or giving an explication of what Strauss actually meant by certain things, but rather as in some way representing some political. Usually it's because Strauss is considered to be the champion of the possibility of some kind of Platonic philosophy where you could say something about agathon or the good, and where you could have a specific version of the good, and all this kind of, and basically where reason hasn't succumbed to the forces of Nietzsche or to the some kind of forces that say we have to make some kind of selection out of what's available and be pragmatic, and it's too big. It's like big data, but it's more like there's too many cogent arguments pointing in too many directions. We have to actually do something. It's sort of in a way that's part of what one derives from Nietzsche's yes saying, the donkey. I mean, remembering in German, ja is yes. One has to be a bit stupid and just put one's foot on the accelerator, and then, in Schmidt in his citation of the jurist Cortez and all that about the talking class, and there's too much talking, and that's what the liberals are, is just endless deliberation to suppose it's Senate as the highest deliberative body in the world, or the greatest. In this sense, I think, von Mises just has no comprehension of what Heidegger's talking about. Although he was a little bit sort of, he wasn't that blunt about it, I thought, but he was basically saying the Seinsvergessenheit, or the forgetfulness of being. He kind of said that, and then he put a few other names in between, and then he said these guys are total idiots. But it's sort of like he said that, and he said somebody that are saying things a little bit similar to Heidegger, but he didn't directly say we can dismiss Heidegger. So he was guarded in that sense. So that's what I say. This guy is like 3/5 educated or something, 4/5 educated. So it's very dangerous. It could be very misleading when you have somebody that knows their stuff up to a point but doesn't see the essence of the teaching, as Dugin does. And I would say I think Zizek's very dishonest, but I do think he sees the essence of a lot of these issues better than most. And when he doesn't, he kind of struggles with them for years to try to, with the Heidegger Geworfenheit interpretation and this kind of stuff. Heidegger is super transcendentalism and this kind of stuff. He tries to force Heidegger to mean something that he can use, which I think is perfectly valid for a thinker. When they know that they're doing it, I think especially, it's sort of like, one can't simply say you're not permitted to do that, and why is that? If we're trying to say what Heidegger said, then there's certain strictures of correctness. That's if we're being a keeper of the sort of the highway to the text, classical. That's what classical philology is. From the point of view of classical philology, that would be a break in ethics to to do that. But when we're just ourselves, maybe we have to use the teaching in some way different than it self-understood itself, and maybe it would be a worse way, but it might have to do with the situation we're in, where we have to where the technological essence is engaged, and then we have to sort of deal with its immediate phronesis on it, as it were. What that means, I think, is shown also in this question of Bannon. So the other side of it was, I looked at another one of those Michael Harcourt, very scholarly, very learned videos, where I don't have a high opinion of him particularly, but he does do his scholarship up to how should I say? He's not really philosophic. That's the thing that I sort of don't like about him. He doesn't really get to the core of the essence of any of the issues. But he does good scholarship around like how political movements have adapted these things and stuff like that. And then he's mentioning, so I'll try to attach these two videos. Then he's mentioning, Bannon early on when he was mixed up with Sarah Palin and the Teaparty. Not shortly after that part in the narrative, Bannon suddenly says, "I'm a Leninist," and then Trump 45, and then Bannon starts pushing the notion that Lenin is the one that destroyed everything. His idea, he's asked, like, what do you consider a Leninist, and that it's somebody who's just destroying things or something like that. Meaning the what Doge later on did and this kind of stuff. And also, according to him, more interestingly, I suppose, according to him, going into certain of the big law firms that are known to do certain dirty tasks for, as it were, the oligarchs, or however he characterizes the certain parts of the financial world that he doesn't like. And he had many specific logistical operations in mind. How many of which have been carried out, I don't know. But I think, the Bannon issue, it's sort of like if you look at Bannon and Chris Como, then you see this, like, from the classical point of view, we could say people that are in the arena doing the fighting, but who therefore are blind to the scientific or philosophic attitude from the sideline or from the outside seeing what's happening. So they're totally extroverted in that sense, and therefore their thinking is incomplete, or it's sort of, they need to be able to flash back and forth in order to really see. Remembering, if you have like the Chicago Bulls or something, I don't know, maybe this is false, but I'm sure there's some cases could be found where the coach, I don't think he was ever a professional basketball player, and that's probably often the case, right? It's like you could be a coach, you could understand the game better and really be better at being a coach without actually having the talent involved. And the same way, sometimes you have thinkers that are theorizing on how economics should be done, for instance, these so-called worldly thinkers, as the American economist put it in his book on Adam Smith and Marx and all these people, who are better at directing things than the people in the trenches, because the people in the trenches are blind. They only have their own tiny little limited experience. They only see it from their angle, and moreover, in the case of Chris Como, you could see his whatever little experience he has is totally the way he interprets it is the way his relatives have interpreted. There's an out-and-out struggle of interest, total football game constantly going on, and the only little place that's not totally tainted by that is the legal system, and therefore you have to uphold the legal system. But in any case, this view is too claustrophobic, and it's false, because obviously there's something else, education, for instance, and that. So let's show that. Let's show an example of that to get more on a Straussian Heideggerian level of consciousness. how did von Mises become sort of powerful? I think it's only because the Chicago school and the Austrian school eventually merged with Frank Knight and his followers. So, and in some sense, they're just the same people. And who is Frank Knight? He's the guy that brought over Max Weber. Weber controls the university, whatever anybody tells you, just as Aristotle controlled the university for 1,000 years. Weber today controls the university. And how does this work in economics? It means exactly that the difference between the earned money and the so-called or earned capital and the so-called fictive capital and the extra, in Marx, the theory of the surplus, that this no longer has any sense. So that's kind of the hard meaning of the Weber coming in. There's no longer this normative sense that there could be a distinction between, so for instance, mere transfers, mere money transfers. So somebody realizes they could charge you a late fee, and they start boosting late fees everywhere. Somebody realizes that they can make a scheme to redefine GDP and then connect it to a scheme to show. I mean, when I say redefine, I don't mean there was original, true, and always definition of GDP that was an Artung or some degeneration happened from it, but I mean that they did it. One group of people had GDP for specific purposes, and then some other group came in with other purposes, and now they want to define it differently. And yeah, other things like that where, well, let's give a specific example of surplus. It's like somebody is charging rent, and then they find out they can increase the demand so they can increase the rent, but they're not actually offering any more. And then there's this question, when is this a gouging or a monopolistic abuse, and when is it not? And so then there are laws about that. So in some sense, so it's still observed by the law, but it's not observed in the following. It's not observed in so far as you're within the law. Anything within that law is then considered to be actual increase in the economy, even though, so increase in GDP, increase in the economy, even though it's really, it's sort of just like how much can you squeeze out of these people? How much are they willing to pay for things that are vital? And then the more so for example, if you make, the medical industry as it is in America, privatized, if you privatize the parts of the country which are vital, you make in effect monopolies that can gouge people on the so-called vital necessities. And then you could call that a gain in GDP, right? Because they're getting more for the same thing. And then there's the long question about whether this type of analysis in the other sense of the production of whether you're at the most advanced, whether you're using the most advanced production methods which are the most efficient, and that should be the scale, and anybody who's spending more hours doing the same thing but taking longer is not doing it efficiently, and then we can say they aren't at the edge of this question of what's the proper amount of profits and what are the gouging or the surplus. This whole type of analysis under Weber can't really be carried out because Weber makes a distinction between facts and norms, or facts and he practices something called the wertfrei wertfreie Wissenschaft, or the value-free Wissenschaft, which is the post-pantheism straight way of understanding the sciences in the Prussian universities. So let me just mention one thing that's of some interest, is that, so Leo Strauss has said, and he was misunderstood on a great number of other small points. Almost everything he said on this guy on the Auron MacIntyre thing, on this Van Niesis guy, he had made a great number of small errors about Leo Strauss too, but I'm not going to go through them. But I just want to say, Strauss has said, comparing the work of Weber he took some course with Weber, and then he said he was comparing it to the course he had just taken with Heidegger, and he said there's simply no comparison. So this is the nicest thing he could say. This Von Mises guy, I would say the same thing. It's sort of like, if we were to study Weber very closely, I would say Weber is that much superior to this guy. Weber has brought in something very broadly accepted, which was also at the foot of Simmel's Enlightment to the Moralwissenschaft that came out in like 1890 or something like that, his introduction to the moral sciences, and which was sort of the first post-Kantian attempt at ethics, which said that Das Sollen is ruled out for the same reason that Kant rules out Das Sein, which is to say it changes status from being a real predicate to being, Kant calls it a logical predicate.